Good evening, everyone, and good morning, everyone. It's Toni on Radio Toni this week, and I'd love to hear who's listening this week. Drop me a line in the chat box and let me know you're live and listening, and welcome to you all. I have in my little studio today the wonderful Dr Annette Duffy, and I'm not going to introduce you just this yet. I will introduce her shortly. So for those of you who haven't listened before, if you want to connect with me, please jump onto my website, tonilontis.com, TONILONTIS.com. You can find me on Facebook, and now Radio Toni has its own Facebook page, so you can jump on and like Radio Toni on Facebook. I'm also on Insta and Twitter. Also LinkedIn if any of you are on the business website. It's been another busy week for me, and I've just returned from a wonderful trip to Melbourne. And I was down in Melbourne with a friend of mine, Donna Gray, who runs women's retreats. She runs them here in Australia and also in Bali. And she asked me to come with her on a winter wonderland retreat down to the Macedon Ranges in Victoria to speak to her lovely group of women. So there were about 15 of us that went down, and the best part of the weekend was that it snowed. So we stayed in a lovely little place called Daylesford. It's wine and hot springs country, and they haven't seen snow in about 4 years, and it's been about 10 years since the snow actually settled on the ground. So we had a wonderful experience seeing the snow, and the owners of the place where we stayed were delighted that it snowed for us. And I've seen snow a number of times now, but these were the biggest, fluffiest snowflakes I'd ever seen. And I was lucky enough to share my bedroom with a girl called Vanessa, and we had this amazing oval window looking out the end of our room where we could sit and watch the snow falling. And I have to say, I still find snow the most peaceful, mesmerising experience, and watching it float down on the sky on the Saturday and Sunday mornings was just wonderful. And I've got some lovely photos on Facebook for those if you want to go and have a quick look on my own personal site, Facebook page, Toni Lontis. So we got to wear wonderful warm clothes and lovely fluffy hats and big coats and walk around in the snow and take lots of photos. The weekend was topped off by a lovely long afternoon in the hot springs complex where we had pools, spas and steam rooms, lovely organic tea, green apples, and it was just the best way to finish up a weekend, really good for the soul and the body. So I have some exciting news that in September I'm going to be launching Toni TV. It will be live streaming on YouTube, and as I know more details, I'll let you know. But it's with the same Talk for Media platform, and I'm pretty excited about launching in September. So over to world news. According to news.com, an autopsy carried out on convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein has deeply increased the mystery surrounding his death. The billionaire financier was facing up to 45 years in prison over federal sex trafficking and conspiracy charges when his body was found in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Centre in Manhattan last Saturday. Two sources familiar with the findings have told the Washington Post that the autopsy found Epstein suffered multiple breaks in his neck bones. One of the broken bones was his hyaloid bone, and this is the bone located near his Adam's apple in males. And while the break could occur when a person, especially an older man, hangs himself, it's more common in victims of homicide by strangulation, according to forensic experts. Hi, Oliver. Why do people do these sick things? Well, mate, I don't know why they do these sick things, but it often takes a really long time for them to be caught. And Epstein was a quite old man when they found him, so he wasn't going to last long in prison anyway, I'm thinking. So according to the National Association for Medical Examiners, who was not involved in Epstein's autopsy, but he did tell the Post that a broken hyaloid bone would raise questions that a pathologist would need to investigate more extensively. If, hypothetically, the hyaloid bone is broken, that would generally raise questions about strangulation, but is not definitive. It does not exclude suicidal hanging. Epstein's death has been described as an apparent suicide by Attorney General Peter Barr, whose department oversees the Bureau of Prisons facility where Epstein was held. News.com reported yesterday that the Metropolitan Correction Centre prison guards had failed to check on the convicted sex offender for several hours, even though the prison protocol demanded inmates be checked every 30 minutes. According to a very explosive New York Times expose, 2 correctional officers on duty at the time of the powerful financier's alleged suicide had been sleeping on the job and later falsified records to cover up their fatal mistake. Now, a different source has told the Washington Post Epstein is also left alone in his cell without a fellow inmate, another breach of normal procedure, despite being on suicide watch from days earlier. They said a person who's been assigned to share a cell with Epstein was transferred on Friday, and for reasons the investigators are still exploring, he did not receive a new cellmate. That left Epstein, who has previously been placed on suicide watch, alone and unmonitored, at least in the hours before his death, even by those officers assigned to guard him. So Evie wants to know, was he going to be put to death in prison anyway by the law? Well, yeah, Evie, it's my understanding that he was. However, for those multiple victims, it's an easy way out for Epstein. So effectively, he's robbed them of their right to go to a fair trial. You're right, Evie. It does save the state and the government an awful lot of money that he's suicide, but it still doesn't give those victims a right to a fair trial, and that they're the only ones that are robbed. So I think that Epstein chose the easy way out for him, and he wasn't looking forward to facing a criminal trial, and suicide is an easy way out. Either that or someone got to him before he could actually attempt suicide. I'm not sure that we will ever know what's happened in this case, but a truly evil man is now past, and that's probably not a bad thing. So over to news surrounding Australia, where I hope that the victims find true peace as well, Willow. I know from personal experience, though, that sometimes the judicial system or the process of going to court is the start of the healing process. However, I'm sure that the victims have lots of support surrounding them. At least I pray that they do. And knowing that he is dead and can no longer harm anyone else would be a great relief to the victims of his crimes. So in Australia, we are surrounded by rising world powers, and an expert has warned us that we can't rely on America for protection. Many Australians are hoping that America will come to our aid in a standoff with a country like China, but one expert believes that we could be left on our own. In his book, How to Defend Australia, it describes a reality check about China's growing power and an acknowledgement of the challenges Australia faces as China seeks to take its place as a dominant player in the East Asian markets and area. The book, written by Professor Hugh White, a former senior official in the Department of Defence and a senior advisor to the former Defence Minister Kim Beazley and Prime Minister Bob Hawke, urges Australians to consider the risks emerging in the region and how to prepare for a very different future. There is still a deep reluctance amongst our political leaders on both sides of politics to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. Professor White's book was released in July and provided a blunt assessment of the strategic risks Australia faces in the region and how it could build up the military to protect itself without relying on America. It hoped to spark a rethink of Australia's defence policy, recognising that things have changed and that America's dominance in the East Asia will likely diminish in the future and leave Australia to defend itself. But Professor White said many people seem to be clinging to the idea that Australia didn't have to choose between China and the US. Professor White said, "A lot argue that we would be mad to abandon a US alliance, and I agree. But what if they abandoned us?" The professor wanted to know. Either side of politics is taking China's challenge seriously, and even if they do, they are saying that we should cling more tightly to the US. The professor's argument is that I didn't think that the US support is a durable solution. And it was likely that the US would eventually withdraw from Asia, which is why he's sceptical of Mike Pompeo saying the US will push back. Mr. Pompeo was in Australia earlier this month and confirmed that America's commitment to the region. "Let it be clear," he said, "the United States is a Pacific nation. We care deeply about what happens here, and we're here to stay," he told reporters. "I think that there is an unbroken relationship grounded in our shared values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights." Despite the strong words, Professor White said the US was not doing anything to push back at the moment. He said that Australia could stand up for itself in Asia that is not dominated by America. Professor White's book comes as warnings about China's ambitions become louder. And Australia's Parliamentary Intelligence Committee is warning Australia need to be clear-eyed about its position in the world, and if challenges were not understood, choices will be made for us and not by us. So the threats to Australia are not easy to understand. So we are vulnerable not just from China, but also from the other big economies such as Japan and perhaps the growing economy of Indonesia. So that's all in the world news for me at the moment. I'm going to throw to a black break, and after we return, I have the amazing Annette Duffy here with me to talk about her life and her book, and it'll be a great interview. Over to you, Rebel. Thanks.
Radio Toni, bringing social consciousness, this time every Thursday evening, live from the Gold Coast, Australia, on W4WN.
Resilience, Memoir of a Broken Little Girl, Discovering a Woman of Strength and Beauty, is the new book from Australian author Toni Lontis. Available in paper, ebook and audiobook formats, Resilience is the true life story of Toni, experiencing and surviving trauma, abuse, mental health issues and the ultimate betrayal of someone she fell in love with. Exposing moral issues you may have dealt with too. Read how hope and happiness triumph in her life. Available at Amazon.com and all good online retailers.
Radio Toni with Toni Lontis, author of Resilience, Memoir of a Broken Little Girl, Discovering a Woman of Strength and Beauty. Available now on Amazon.com and in all good bookstores.
Welcome back, lovely listeners. I've got a wonderful woman in my studio this morning, and before I introduce you to her, let me just tell you a little about Dr Annette Duffy. She received a Doctorate of Philosophy in Indigenous Spiritual Leadership in 2010. She was published nationally and internationally, receiving an international award for inspirational leadership. Her educational career spans 35 years as a teacher, principal, and supervisor of schools. Annette has been a guest speaker in several forums across Australia, and she's in Indigenous Education. Annette migrated to Australia from Scotland with her husband and 4 children in 1988 in the wave of Australia's bicentennial celebrations. Annette lives in the Queensland rainforest not far from here, and is blessed to have her immediate and extended family nearby. In her memoir, In Heaven on Earth, it's a love story played out in the afterlife and the earth life, following one lover's death, transgressing into the realms. This memoir recognised the profound grief suffered by souls when parted by death, whilst offering hope, love, and solace for those aggrieved. In Heaven on Earth is part of a wave of literature channeled from the higher self, disincarnate loved ones, the divine or source, experienced and recorded in popular memoirs and complemented by a body of research in quantum consciousness and integral life studies. Dr. Duffy does not work to validate the afterlife. Rather, she tells a story, grief-stricken at the shock she personally experiences, followed by profound exhilaration at her dead husband's communication from the afterlife. This raw and honest story explores the big questions, asking how human spirits may contribute to the awakening of their souls and the collective consciousness whilst on Earth's learning journey. So, listeners, I'd love to introduce you to Dr. Annette Duffy. Welcome to my studio, Annette.
Thanks, Toni. I'm so pleased to be here.
I'm so excited to have Annette with me. It's a rare experience that I actually have someone in my studio with me. And listeners, you'll notice that Annette has that glorious Scottish accent. And she's actually just returned to Australia from a big trip overseas. And I'm wondering if you could tell our listeners where you've been and what you've been up to in recent times.
Yes, Toni. I have just returned after 2 months. I was in the UK and Scotland, in Ireland. My mother still lives in Ireland. She's retired on the west coast in County Clare. I visited my family and my husband's family in Glasgow, and friends and family in Edinburgh. And I did a road trip with 3 friends of mine. We went up north in Scotland, and as often is the case, some of the terrain up there, the Scottish Highlands, that Celtic connection, I hadn't actually been on that road trip before, and going with 3 girlfriends from my childhood was fantastic. So, and then I visited some friends in south of France and then in Cyprus.
Yeah.
And came home via Cyprus.
Yeah. So for our listeners, any of you who haven't visited northern Scotland, it's a magnificent country. It oozes life and legends and spirits, and I know that when we visited last year, we also did the trip up north from Edinburgh, and Edinburgh also for me was an incredibly beautiful city, again filled with enormous amounts of history, and you almost feel the ghosts of the past wandering around. So, Annette, the places that you visited in the north of Scotland?
I went to the east coast, Ploughton, Inverness. Inverness. I have been to Iona before a couple of times, which is a very special place. It's sacred ground.
Yes.
I was in Edinburgh too.
Yes.
I love the city of Edinburgh. I stayed in Edinburgh for a few nights and had a great time there. I also went to the castle. I've forgotten the name because
near Inverness.
No. Ellen Dolan Castle.
Yes.
I couldn't remember it then.
There's so many listeners. There are so many castles in Scotland that I can't remember them all, and we visited a stack of them. They are scattered throughout the country. There's ruins of castles, there's abbeys, and just an amazing space. Just a bit of trivia about Edinburgh, though. I'm wondering if you realise that J.K. Rowling penned Harry Potter in Edinburgh, and I have to say that it's almost like the spirit of Harry Potter can be seen and heard throughout Edinburgh. But sorry, back to you, Annette. The castles are really beautiful, aren't they?
Well, particularly, I had never been to Edinburgh Castle before, and that's where they filmed a good few movies.
Yes,
you know, they had a couple of James Bond movies and a couple with Sean Connery, and a couple of other thrillers filmed there.
Yes,
it's spectacular.
It is spectacular country.
Look out, guys.
It's so just for Zara, Annette's accent is Scottish, although she's been in Australia for
30 years.
30 years. So that beautiful Scottish accent, I'm glad it hasn't dulled over time, because it's for me, it's like music to hear. It's a beautiful accent.
Toni, they say that the cusp for losing your accent is 12 years old.
Really?
Yes. So I was 30 when I emigrated.
Oh, okay.
And the accent was well and truly
yes.
entrenched, if you like.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because our oldest, it was 12 years old when we emigrated.
Yes.
And the boys were younger. The three boys were younger. But she kept her Scottish accent.
Oh,
and
really?
the boys have the Australian accent.
Isn't that fascinating?
Well, they're grown-up men now.
Yeah.
But they have but they speak to me in Scottish with a Scottish accent. It's as if they think I won't understand them. And they have to give me a bit of kind of leeway with that.
That's fascinating. So I'm wondering if you can tell our listeners about the decisions that led you to Australia and your journey to get here with 4 children and your husband.
I think we came for an adventure.
Yes.
We were quite settled in Scotland, and we had I was teaching and my husband was working. He had a business there, and some people working with him. And we'd always dreamed of coming to Australia or Canada.
Yes.
And basically, we got to that stage in our life in our early 30s where we had to make a decision.
Yes.
Were we going to let the dream go?
Yes.
Or were we going to have a go?
Yes.
So we had a go.
Yeah.
But I don't think we really understood, had any concept of the enormity of coming to. We were the first to come with 4 children.
Yes.
And 3 under 4.
Yes.
And anyway, did I regret it? There's things I gained and there's things I lost.
Yes.
But in terms of an extended family there. Yeah. But my family all followed us to Australia, and we now have 35 of us here. Intergenerational.
That's fantastic.
We started a bit of a trend.
Yes.
But I could have roots in Scotland just the same now as I can in Australia.
Yeah.
Your heart is where your home is.
Yeah. So what was it about Australia that drew you to the country?
I'll try and answer you that because it's a difficult one, because I think there was a push and a pull.
Yes.
We were living in Scotland at the time of Thatcherite Britain.
Yes.
And it was a cold time in the history of the UK.
Yeah.
It's my belief, it's my politics.
Yes.
And I didn't like the way that UK was going. So the diaspora of the Irish, the diaspora of the Scottish people, the migration story is to go to something that you believe is better.
Okay, yeah.
And it's not that I don't love Scotland. And of course, but there was a drive as well.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a negative thing. It wasn't just about leaving the homeland.
Yeah.
It was about having a go in a different homeland and a different way of life.
Yeah.
And we were looking not just for the sun, but for the lifestyle that Australia was offering to migrants, where you could have a different, more outdoor life.
Okay.
And the opportunities that would bring.
Yeah.
And also, I think it was also an opportunity to redefine yourself as a family.
Yes.
I don't know if that makes sense, but there was some kind of adventurous spirit in it.
It actually makes a lot of sense to me because my brother left Australia for Canada 27 years ago,
Yes.
and his whole life and his 4 children were born in Canada, and they've had a very different life, and it's brought them very close together. So he's incredibly connected to his 4 children because they were in Canada, away from all their family and friends, and it's been very good for them. So I completely understand that. So when you got to Australia, what did you do? How did you support yourself?
Well, my husband had a job to come to. He had contacted people in Melbourne. We actually came to Melbourne, Victoria, first of all.
And in saying that, listeners, Melbourne would possibly be closer to the climate of Scotland versus many other places across Australia. So, for instance, Queensland is hot and humid and tropical, whereas the wonderful changes in season, and it's cold and you can get snow and it can get drizzly and wet. So a bit more like Scotland. So I understand the pull to Melbourne. So your husband had a job to come to?
Yes, and I managed to get a job teaching basically as soon as I arrived.
Fantastic.
So, and got the children into school. But,
yes.
Hey there.
But in many respects, it was as big a move moving from Melbourne up to here, because for our listeners, it's 2,000 kilometres away. It's a 2-hour plane journey. It's like in Scotland going to Europe.
Yes, you know? And that's a huge thing for people that emigrate to Australia. It is a massive country, and particularly for those emigrating from the United Kingdom, which is quite a tiny country compared to Australia. The distance is very hard to get used to, isn't it? To go anywhere in Australia, for instance, from one side of the east coast to the west coast is a 7-hour plane journey. Even as we stand from the east coast to the west coast. So we're a massive country, and that's a big thing for when you come from the UK and Europe, where you just jump on a 2-hour flight and you're in a different country, in a different land. And yeah, I have to admire your strength and your husband Brian's strength in bringing 4 children across that huge. So it's 24 to 30 hours at a minimum to get a plane flight journey to get from the UK to Australia. It's a massive thing to move a family of 6 from there. So that's just amazing that you would have the courage to do that, Annette. And so your husband had work and you had work, and you commenced on living a life in Australia with the children, and you had a wonderful life, I understand, and you have this amazing career in education and teaching. Do you want to tell our listeners about that career?
Well, I had taught in Scotland. I taught English literature in Scotland and in primary levels as well as secondary levels. When I came to Australia, I taught only for a short time, Toni, and our listeners, because very soon I ended up in I got opportunities here.
Yes.
Very, very quickly, rather. I got a job as an assistant principal in a school, and then when I came to Queensland, I'm talking about, I taught in Melbourne as well for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And then I became a school principal a few years after that.
Yes.
So I was a school principal for about 12 years.
Yes.
I moved back into the primary setting.
Yeah.
Because I think because I enjoyed the fact that I was passionate about the fact that I actually was working with families as a primary school principal.
Yes.
You were working with the students and the teachers, and working very closely with them, but you also were working with the whole family. Often of the students.
Yes.
And I enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah.
It was a real community-based thing.
Yeah.
So I was principal of 2 schools for about 12 years, 13 years.
That's a busy role. Yeah. So I know that part of your work led you to work closely with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups, and you subsequently went on to get your PhD or doctorate in Indigenous spiritual leadership. I'd love for you to tell the listeners about that work with Indigenous people.
I work on a number of projects which were practical projects when I worked in schools, particularly when I was a principal, and I worked with the local community, and in this case it was Aboriginal people.
Yes.
During my two principalships.
Yes.
And we tried to work on this a collaborative venture for our listeners in Australia and in the UK. There's an initiative which is currently going on, which would not be unlike the initiatives we've had in the USA and Canada and New Zealand, where there's an attempt to close the gap in education and in employment and in health and so on for the original peoples, of the land. And in Australia, that would be the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. There's been a lot of money, a lot of goodwill, a mammoth amount of money.
Yes.
But so far, that gap has not closed, and in some respects, it's widened. I'm talking about incarceration rates of young people. I'm talking about, the life expectancy of a male Aboriginal in Australia is 58 years of age.
58 years old, people. That is so young, and it's just incredibly sad that our Indigenous men are suffering in this way.
Yeah. So there's many more of those. There's a plethora. A deep, deep wound in Australia, I believe.
There is, yes.
And sometime our history has been our recent history, which of course is only 200 years.
Yeah.
But our recent history has been that we've tried to bridge that gap by putting money there, as I said, with goodwill. And it's not worked in the way that we would have liked it to work, because we never got the fact that we weren't actually asking our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander
what they needed,
what they wanted, what they needed. We were trying to impose our culture again and again on their culture, instead of learning. There's great things about Westernized culture, and there are great things about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. For example, their leadership models. So I was working in a practical sense with other leaders, Aboriginal leaders. I was learning from them.
Yeah.
In many respects, it was sitting, and I don't exaggerate, at the feet of gurus.
Yes.
Because they get that thing about how we need to have shared leadership.
Yes.
It's not the big hero, that we need, the giant of a man or a woman, but mainly it was the man, the model that we had in Westernized culture.
Yes.
So with working with them helped me begin to realise that other styles of leadership were much more fruitful.
Yeah.
And they actually can cause healing or bring about healing.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we're all connected in spirit.
Yeah.
We may have a different culture.
Yes.
Which runs deep. Your cultural, you see the world through your cultural eyes.
Yes.
You see them through historical eyes. You see them through your life's learning journey. But when you can actually get close to people by exposing your vulnerability and learning from each other.
Yes.
Trying not to work from the ego.
Yes.
I mean, the ego, we need our ego on this land, but on this earth, but trying not to work so much from that.
Yes.
But to work from a place of love or work from the heart.
Yes.
Then you can actually make the bridge a bit like that.
Yes.
And I think that's what we've not realised here.
Yeah.
We need to actually tell our Black history.
Yes, we do.
And
in all
in our schools.
In all its
pluses
detail.
And definitely its minuses.
Yeah. So I guess in the US there are similar hardship for your Indian people, but for Australians, the Aboriginal history is particularly horrid. They were massacred, they were incarcerated, they were ripped from their families. There is an incredible wound left from the treatment of Australia's Indigenous people. And as Annette alluded to, the gap is not closing. And despite the fact that government after government after government has pumped money into trying to fix that, it's still not being fixed. It's still not, there's still a wound for the Aboriginal people. So can you tell us some of the things you learned about Aboriginal spiritual leadership I think the listeners would find it fascinating, that side of it.
Some of the things I have learned on this journey working with Aboriginal colleagues and Torres Strait Islanders is that the in Westernized styles of leadership, we often have, we would talk about now emotional intelligence being very important in leadership.
Yes.
And Aboriginal peoples would say the same thing. The more refined or the better able you are, and not just in the intellectual domain, but of course in the emotional intelligence domain.
Yes.
The better you connect to people, the better you're able to lead with people.
Yes.
But it's not lead people; it's lead with people.
It is lead with people.
And that is very much the style or the manner or the essence of Aboriginal spiritual leadership.
Wow.
They would have another layer on it. We are very capable of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We're all human beings connected at heart and soul.
Yes.
But they've never lost that.
Yes.
Through their 60,000 years of generations.
They're an ancient, beautiful people.
They would have the circle of learning.
Yes.
So they would be working with each other and recognising that you, Toni, would have particular skills in one capability. Some skills in another area. It's not just the one person at the top of the hierarchical structure who is the leader. There are several people who are able to do that.
Yeah.
And they create the honour, like a lot of cultures do. They honour wisdom that comes with age.
Yes.
So they pay reverence to
the
elders in the community. And that's very much a part of their leadership style as well, and manner. And at the end of the day, they have a religion. Well, I wouldn't call it a religion. It's their spiritual, an awareness of spirituality. So they talk about walking in two worlds. They walk on the earth world, but they also walk with their ancestors and the wisdom of their ancestors. So that's another very deep layer of the recognition that this is normal. To actually have our ancestors or our higher self and deep belief in that.
Yes.
And they also help us in our leadership. So sometimes when we're pondering the big questions in life, it's very common for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders to actually ask the higher self, God, the one, or ancestor, whatever you want, to channel, to sit quietly.
Yes.
Which is very much their style. We're learning it now with meditation and contemplation. Mm-hmm. We're relearning it, I think.
I think we're relearning
it. But they didn't lose that.
Yeah.
So they understand the wisdom. It's not necessarily our wisdom, but all the answers are within.
Yes.
If we search deeply,
we'll
get help.
Yeah. So that's a very precious part of their culture, to have that knowledge of the earth life and the higher level of spirit. So Western cultures would relate that to God or whatever, but I wonder, I think that across the world there seems to be an acknowledgement that that higher universal spiritual level is not just one God. It might be multiple. I'll use gods because there's not one word. I like to refer to it as the universe. Do the Aboriginals just refer to it as the afterlife, and how do they refer to it, Annette?
I couldn't answer definitively that question.
Yeah.
Because same as any culture, there are different. There would be different opinions on that.
Okay.
From different areas in Australia, I believe.
Yeah.
So I feel I couldn't speak for Aboriginal colleagues and friends.
Yeah.
But mostly they too would say, I think that God, the depiction of God in the human, we gave him a body and we personified God.
Yes, we personified God. Yes.
To help us to understand God.
Yes.
But my understanding is that Aboriginal peoples, Torres Strait Islanders and ourselves, if we have this mode of thinking, many people think this way, I believe now, or have thought this way and continue to think this way. They think of God as not as one man,
yes,
but as an energy source,
yes,
a pure essence,
yes,
omnibeneficence, omnipotence, pure energy,
yes,
which is pure love,
yes,
unconditional love.
Yes,
And it's that source that we can draw our greatest strength from.
yes,
And it's accessible to all of us, no
yes.
matter what our particular cultures or creeds
or
or
our
beliefs.
particular religion. So that belief would fit and suit and sit across any religion across the world. That belief in a higher energy source.
Yes.
And for me, I have to agree with you, Annette. I like that thought and those thinkings. So we're fast approaching our first break, but before we get on to talking about your book, and I'm really wanting to get on to talk about that, what do you think that your vision for the future is, particularly around that conversation of spirituality?
The subtitle of my thesis was Dreaming Australia.
Yes.
And I suppose it echoed famous speeches like one of my heroes in my lifetime, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
People like that who have, to me, were working from their higher self.
Yes.
In the way that they approached adversity and terrible trauma.
Yes. Yes.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Yes.
We can all think of many people like that who have stood out and instead of working with the lowest common denominator in their leadership, which is people's hatred or prejudice, or people taking their jobs or people taking their money, those kind of concepts which unfortunately across our leadership in many of our countries, in our listeners' countries, as we speak, they appeal to the lowest common denominator of the people instead of appealing to their higher selves. And we're all capable of rising to that occasion if we have leadership which honours us and honours our potential. So my vision, as I say, that the second title to my book, or the subtitle, was Dreaming Australia. And the reason for that was that I do dream a vision of Australia, which would be where we do have an egalitarian system. Where people, it's not one which is, it's a democracy which is true to the original demos of the people. Where people had a voice, and some people didn't have more of a voice because of their background, and their how much money, their pecuniary basis, their financial status, or indeed their other status. So it might sound a bit out there, but I do believe that utopia is we're capable of, as we learn to live by our spirit, and go by our higher purpose in life, not our lowest purpose in life.
That's a really powerful concept for our listeners to try and get today, is that all people should be equal no matter what their status. And playing across the world at the moment, we have a lot of rich white men in leadership roles, and I'm hoping, as I'm sure Annette does too, that will change to be leaders, whether they're male or female, but spirit-led leaders who are in touch with that higher self, that higher level of thinking. That would be amazing for humanity as a whole to grab onto that concept. So just before we go to the break, when we come back, we're going to be talking to Dr. Annette about her beautiful book, In Heaven and on Earth. And it's a wonderful story of the connection between the afterlife and the earth life. And so I hope you'll stay with us and listen as I talk to Dr. Annette about her beautiful memoir. But we're going to go to a break now with a few songs and some advertisements, and we'll be back after the break. Over to you, Rebel. And welcome back, everyone. Today on Radio Toni, I'm with the beautiful Dr. Annette Duffy, and I'd love to get on to talking about her recently published memoir, and it's called In Heaven on Earth. So, Annette,
Can you tell our listeners about your book?
Certainly, I'll try and say a couple of things about it. It's a memoir. I wrote it 2 years ago. Basically, after my husband died, nearly 5 years ago now, almost 5 years ago, when Brian died, it was a sudden death. He had a heart attack and never came home from work one day. I had been married for 39 years, just shy of our 40th wedding anniversary. We had our ups and downs, and many of them. However, there was a great love there. When Brian died, immediately after he died, I started to experience a lot of communication, not just in symbolic form, but I could not hear physically with a voice, but through my senses, hear Brian trying to contact me. And that took place for about 6 months, a lot of channeling that I was doing, and I wrote down everything. Sometimes it was in my sleep, sometimes it was in meditation, sometimes it would be when I'd be walking in the rainforest. So through different mediums, he was communicating with me. So I had this juxtaposition of profound grief. I was grief-stricken.
Yes.
I got to know what that term meant. And at the same time,
because he was a wonderful husband and father and partner, wasn't he?
He was. He had his flaws, like I do, like we all do as humans.
Yes.
However, he was the old way we used to say, a good man.
Yes, he was a good man.
Yeah, he was a good man.
Yeah.
And so the enormity of that loss is part of the reason I wrote this book.
Yes.
It helped me with my grief.
Yes.
To actually write.
Yes.
And put some things down. But there are other reasons for the purpose of the book. My hope is that it does help, and I've had some quite definite feedback from people who have lost someone, who have said that the book has helped them.
Definitely.
In the process of grieving.
Yes.
The second purpose of the book is really about trying to raise our individual and collective consciousness.
Yes.
Because the exhilaration that came with, the rawness that came with the death, at the same time, there was this huge, I'd always believed in a higher source, God, however you want to name that. But to actually have it proven, so to speak, in my experience, through the contact with my husband, or the contact through the veil, the very thin veil into the other worlds that are around us, has been an amazing journey.
Yeah.
I didn't wish it upon myself.
No.
I'd rather have them in, flesh and blood.
Yes.
However, the reason for this book has been a higher determined purpose.
Yes. Because
it's made it authentic.
Yes. Yes. Definitely.
And now, different people will have different opinions on that, and they're all valid. But this is my experience.
Yes.
So the book really is about my experience since Brian died, and the things I've learned through communicating with him.
Yes.
And my higher self as well. Yes. I don't know where one often stops and the other starts.
Agreed.
It's I just try and hone my skills to get better at really listening.
Yeah.
In that process.
Yeah. So, Evie, in answer to your question, Annette's husband, Brian, was obviously a very good man and very good to her and the kids. And James wants to know, is he an earthbound spirit?
I know I've heard people using that terminology.
Yeah.
I don't really believe in that kind of differentiation.
Yeah.
Because I believe the heavens there are several heavens. They are not, one is not more than the other.
Yes.
But they're at levels at which we vibrate.
Yes.
Now, Einstein and quantum physics, and I'm no scientist, nor do I ever pretend to be.
Yeah.
But my understanding through Bruce Lipton's work and other people's work, where they've tried to break it down for us, is that everything in the world vibrates. The earth is a glowing, moving,
vibrational,
beautiful, vibrational.
Yes.
Rocks of everything is vibrating. So there are some people that believe that spirits are earthbound, meaning they're lesser spirits.
Yeah.
You know, like fairies or people
yes.
have different beliefs there.
Yes.
However, I believe that the human condition is different. The consciousness of the human is different.
Yes.
We don't reincarnate as a lesser.
Yes.
You know, when I say lesser, I'll try and be more articulate. Not having the moral and other purposes that humans have on this earth, because we are spirit and human body for X amount of time.
Yes.
So I think Brian is able to communicate with me, and love transgresses the realms, the realms of the vibrations into other worlds. But I think that human spirits can be earthbound in one respect, which is we are reincarnating.
Yes.
So I'm an earthbound spirit.
Yes.
And I have reincarnated before, and I will reincarnate again.
Yes.
That's my belief system. I hope that answers James'
question. Harper wants to know, how does this work? That's a great question.
How does it work, me communicating?
Harper, I'm hoping that you want to know how Brian communicates to Annette, so we'll answer that. And if we're answering your question, just let us know, Harper. I think Harper wants to know how Brian communicates with you.
Harper, the way that I have learned to get better, I've got better at it, but it's not perfect by any manner of means. I have tried to differentiate between my ego, which I think comes from my right hand side. So when I have a thought, and it's only in my head,
yes,
it's my rational side, which is my human brain.
Yes.
Then I know it's my ego. I kind of know it's my ego talking.
Yes.
Right. But when I really try and listen from my heart, which is the left hand side.
Yes.
And when I feel that Brian moves the air around my cheek.
Yes.
To let me know it's not a magic thing, it's just something that he quite deliberately does to let me know he's around and wants to communicate. So he moves the air around my left cheek, and I can feel the hairs in the back of my neck, if you like.
Yes.
And you might have heard people saying things like that.
Yes.
So I kind of know it's him, or I do know it's him.
Yes.
Because it's quite definitive.
Yes.
But the funny thing about that is that before Brian died, for a few years prior to that,
yes,
I was practicing, trying to learn meditation,
yes,
and trying to differentiate between the ego voice,
yes,
and the heart voice, because your
yes,
heart's much more intelligent than
yes,
the rational brain.
Yes, yes.
Your whole body's much more intelligent than the rational brain. And there's science to back that up.
Yes.
So when he communicates with me, I used to do that when I was trying to meditate.
Yeah.
So he knew that before he died, so he used that mechanism to validate that it was him.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff. I've actually got the hairs on my arm standing up quite dramatically, as Annette can see, and I'll try and calm them down. So yeah, Harper does want to know how we can communicate with those that have passed on. So I think it's about listening with that heart or spirit voice. It's about being in a quiet place where you can hear that person or acknowledge. I know for some people that their loved ones talk to them via animals or butterflies. I know I have a friend whose loved one passed on, and they will see blue butterflies when they're not meant to be around. They're just out of the blue. There'll be a blue butterfly, and she will know, okay, that's that person. So I think, am I right in thinking that there's a number of different ways that you can communicate with that spirit world? It's about actually being open to that understanding and allowing yourself to think in those terms. Yeah, I
think I agree with you. The main thing is about opening and not being afraid.
Yes,
I still work from fear a lot of the time. It's a human condition.
Yes,
I try and keep it in check.
Yes,
and face it so that it doesn't have as much power over me.
Yes,
but I'm not afraid to communicate now.
Yeah,
and I wasn't ever really, but I know some people have that fear.
I know
people too have a very, very, very fearful of that thought of communication.
I think it's just the unknown.
Yeah.
But to answer Harper's second part about the symbols and so on, I do believe that people have passed on, and well, they're not passed on; they've just passed into another realm.
Their human body is gone, but their spirit remains.
Still, so their consciousness is there. And they have the same, well, this is interesting, they have the same personality.
Yeah.
So I thought naively that they would lose their personality, but they don't, because that's who their spirit's essence is.
Yes.
So they can use symbols and do use symbols, my understanding is as well. Like often I will see parrots in the rainforest, and there's a male parrot and a female parrot. The red is the male, and the green, and they go together. And sometimes when they come, I know that he's let me know things are okay. And there's other symbols that are used. So I think that they can work with energy, any kind of energy, electricity, light,
the energy, isn't
candle, fire, earth, the elements. They can work through the elements more easily than maybe more concrete man-made things. But that doesn't mean they can communicate in any domain, I believe. It's if you want to open up to it.
And be open to that communication, I guess.
And listen with the ear of your heart.
It's actually a very beautiful and comforting thought to know that the spirit remains even after the physical body has gone. And I know that your belief in that has been very helpful in that terrible grief-stricken state that you were in for, I think it was probably 3 years that you were in that grief-stricken state, and then you were able to write the book and talk about some of the things that Brian communicated with you. Do you want to share some of those things with our listeners, some of the things that he specifically communicated to you?
I'll leave some of it to the book.
Yes, I was just going to say, don't spoil the book, because the book is really good.
Yes, I'd heard the term 7 heavens.
Yes.
7 heavens. You know, I'm in 7th heaven.
Yes.
I'd heard that all through my life. You hear sayings like that. But Brian has, one of the things he's told me, which is quite profound, is that there are 7 realms. But they're not closed off, they're fluid.
Yes.
You know, that they're fluid, it's just different vibrations. So part of what spirit does, and what individual spirits do, what collectively spirits do, is they come and have an earth experience to raise their own vibration, to raise the level of their vibration. Because earth is life on earth is an earth life learning journey for spirit. So when spirit comes into the body for X number of years, that's a contract. Which is explained to me, a contract for X number of years that we make with our higher selves. We come to this earth and other parallel lives, but we'll not go into that one. I've not got my head round any
it's
of that.
hard to understand, isn't it?
But if we just stick to the earth-bound spirits who we are, then we have during our lifetime X number of learnings that maybe we've contracted that we want to have experiences to help us learn. We're not here just to be happy. We're here to experience life and learn.
And that's not always easy. I think that we're failing in our understanding of life if we think that life is meant to be easy. Life is meant to be a journey, and part of that journey is sometimes learning really hard lessons. And from my perspective, I agree with you. I think that many of us are on predetermined journeys, and there's certain lessons that we have to learn. And until we learn those specific lessons, we keep having them or experiencing them. But once they're learnt, they're learnt. Is that your understanding?
Yes, part of my understanding, would be that. And please know I'm not setting myself as any expert.
No.
It's just it's great to have this conversation, because in the conversing we try and better understand our position. But I think that that we have learnings to happen in this earth.
Yes.
They're not necessarily all good experiences, or no, they're good experiences, but they might not be positive experiences or easy experiences. However, there may be challenges or obstacles that are predetermined, the big rocks, and it might be just an encounter with a person. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be a whole range of factors that we set up in our lives that are the big rocks that are predetermined, and those are to help us to actually face the some people call it karma. The things that we have still to learn. But we're given tools from the other side that we bring with us.
I agree.
So in the same way as earth is a learning journey for spirit, when we go to the afterlife, we take with us the learnings from earth. So earth is a learning, has taught spirit more things to be able to raise its vibration
higher.
So we help both spheres, if you like, or realms, earth realm and afterlife realm, are learning journeys for spirit. One complements the other. And that's why we come to earth, because earth's not an easy gig.
No, it's not an easy gig, is it? I'm sure our listeners would agree. Earth is not an easy gig.
Not always an easy gig.
No, it's not. Nor, I suppose, should it meant to be. Now, something I wanted to ask you about, and this is a question that we haven't talked about, but I know that lots of people believe in fairies, goblins, and those mythical, spiritual beings. What are your thoughts around those things?
Very unsure. But I kind of believe in it. I kind of believe that
the
spirits are around
for
the
Irish.
forest, and you know. So I think there are spiritual qualities of, for example, the rainforest where I live. And that there may be in the old way, the Greeks and Romans, I think, tried to put a name to it. They'd have a god of the sun, a god of the land, the god of the sea, and so on. And I think that was because maybe some of the knowing when they were naming them is the same as what we are trying to do now. We're trying to name the spirit the essence, the spirit of those things that we think are stationary and they don't have feelings like humans, I don't believe. However, there may be our spirits looking after those particular areas, the energy around those areas, sacred places like Uluru, which is sacred rock in the middle of Australia, which used to be called Ayers Rock, but in Aboriginal languages it's Uluru. So that's sacred ground, like Machu Picchu. I'm trying to think of others. There's many others across the world.
There's an essence around.
There's a real energy zone around them. There's sacred vortexes, I think.
There's something very.
So maybe spirits are looking after them.
And it's a palpable from a human experience. You can feel the energy.
The energy's different.
The energy's different, and going back to our conversation earlier about Aboriginal people, they have sacred sites. Uluru is one of those, and they aren't sacred sites for no reason. If you visit those places as a non-Aboriginal, you can still feel and know the energy that surrounds that sacred space. And I'm sure for our American listeners, there would be sacred places for your Indian population, I'm sure. I must say that I haven't actually ever delved much into the American Indian history or that. I've done lots more on our own Aboriginal Indigenous people and their sacred spaces and their ways of burial and culture, because it's incredibly fascinating and wonderful to learn about those things. I think it's very helpful to understand the wonderful things about other cultures. It's very enriching for the human experience, don't you think, Annette?
Entirely so.
Entirely
so, Toni.
So I know that you've written the book, and I know that you're going on a little bit of a promotional thing at the moment with the book. In our next session, we will tell the readers where they can get the book, and I will put up some contacts for you at the end of the show. But what do you see now as your journey? I know that you've got your 4 children are all here, and the grandkids, and
Yes.
they're all relatively close to where you live now. What do you see the future holds for Dr. Annette Duffy?
I have retired from my full-time job
Yes.
recently, very recently, after 40 years
Yeah.
in the educational field. I would like to go into a different kind of education.
Yes.
I think that moving to the rainforest, which has that sacred energy,
Yes.
higher energy, then
Yes.
it's amazing. You just feel it when you get there.
Yeah.
Where I'm fortunate enough to live,
Yeah.
I think that might have been one of the big rocks
Yes.
that I ended up there
Yes.
in that place for a purpose.
Yeah.
And even although it's enormous to think of it, I think it's meant to be a place for peace and reconciliation,
A retreat of
a
healing.
retreat of healing.
Mhm.
That it's not, it doesn't belong to me in many respects. We're only here for a period of time,
Yes.
but maybe I should be sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should be sharing that sacred space with people who would come to learn spiritual practices.
Yes.
And specifically, I mean, I would be thinking of yoga, meditation,
Yes.
because yoga is not just about the movement,
No.
the asanas. It's about moving your body to be
It
able
is.
to allow yourself to sit quietly so that you can communicate with the higher self.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it would be a place where maybe also some academic work.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not talking in the purest vein,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I'm
yeah.
talking about learning.
Yeah.
I'm talking about reading and discussing things.
Yes.
And those kind of practices where we interact with each other
And talk
and get
and
our
learn.
heads and we learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of varied practices that I want to set up in the centre.
Yes.
And I'm working towards that.
Yeah.
So that I use the place is a place of happiness,
Yes.
but a place of deep learning too.
Yes. Yes.
Where we help each other
yeah.
through experiential learning.
Yeah.
Because I think we can't just stay in the theory and the academic vein.
No.
We can't just stay in the practical vein. Where those two merge, the theory and the practice,
Yes.
is where one complements the other.
Yes.
Where we really learn as human beings,
Yes.
I think.
Yes. Yes. And I'm so excited to hear that for you. I think that there is a groundswell of wise women rising up across the world whose sole purpose is to teach and educate people about the higher levels as humanity understanding fully those higher principles of love. And I'm really excited to hear that is part of your future. I certainly will be watching on to see what happens in that space for you. So you have one daughter at home with you currently, Annette, and the rest are close, so family is all close by.
Where I live, there are two houses on the property.
Yes.
So my daughter's Claire, she lives in one of the houses.
Yes.
And my 3 sons are round about the Gold Coast.
Yes.
And my 3 grandsons
Yes.
are round about the Gold Coast.
Yes.
And their partners
Yeah.
and loved ones.
Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate that way.
Yeah, that's good. The world is a better place with grandbabies in it. I have to be very biased when I say that. I think I might have mentioned to you all that briefly. I had my daughter and our wee grandson home for a little while whilst they were in between accommodation, and I didn't realise after such a short time being with us how much I would miss his physical presence in our lives. Grandbabies are the blessing you get for having raised wonderful children, and they're really beautiful. So just before we go to the break, I'm wondering if you can quickly tell us about the Carumban Valley, because that's where Annette lives, and it's a very special. So I live in the Tallebudgera Valley, so the Carumban Valley is the next valley over, and they're both very spiritual valleys with lots of healers and spiritual people, creatives living in both valleys. So just tell us briefly a little bit about your little valley.
Going back to your question a minute ago, Toni, about the purpose of the rainforest.
Yes.
I was thinking, and I have been thinking, there comes a flow of energy.
Yes.
Can come when, well, some people say the universe.
Yes.
The universe brings things together for you.
Yeah.
So I'm being serious.
Yes.
So having met you, and right.
Yes.
And no lesser.
Yes.
But
yes.
having met you, Toni, having met healers that I know out in the valley.
Yes.
There would be people who perform physical healing, like Reiki.
Yes.
Like a massage.
Yes.
And kinesiology. All of those kind of
very special
that are now being acupuncture and so on. You know, the energy flow. They're working with energy all the time. So they're working with the body's ability, the mind's ability, the heart's ability to heal itself.
Yes.
So they're not doing things to you. It's a very different philosophy.
Absolutely.
From a doctor fixing you.
Yes.
And I know medical doctors have moved a long way since that concept.
And to add to that too, often it's about the combination of known medical science and the very valuable energy work that can bring about true healing in people's lives.
Yes. Totally, and it's positive thinking as well.
Yes.
I'm not being naive, I hope, saying that, because
I'm an incredibly positive person, and I believe very deeply that positive energy brings about enormous change in people's lives.
Yes, and so in the not too distant past, these healers were boo-hooed.
Yes, they were.
To put it colloquially.
Yes.
But nowadays they're accepted. They're even, in your healthcare fund.
Yes.
But more than that, there's a merging of East and West.
I agree.
So the Eastern philosophies of acupuncture and so on, and power
together.
Have come together with the Western.
Yes.
Western is valid too.
Absolutely.
And we need to merge them.
Correct.
And be able to use all of that energy
to heal our bodies.
To heal our bodies and souls.
Yeah. So we're going to just quickly pop on to another break, and after this break we'll come back and have another chat to Dr. Annette. Over to you, Rebel. And welcome back, everyone. Today on Radio Toni we've been talking with the lovely Dr. Annette Duffy about all things spiritual and her communication with her past husband. So before we went to the break, we were talking about Annette's dreams for the future, and that includes a retreat of some description in the Carumban Valley, which is on the border of Queensland and New South Wales in Australia, in the rainforest, and the beauty and the energy of that place. So one of the questions I had down to ask Annette was around the philosophy about free will and determination, and I just wondered quickly if you could explain what you mean by that, Annette.
I think it's one of the big deep questions that we have as humans in our lifetime, about our purpose on earth. And it's been it's like the chicken and the egg question as well, what comes first.
Yes.
Some people would move towards free will, that while we are on earth,
yes,
in the human body, that the spirit has total free will.
Yes.
I would, and some people would be at the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yes.
That everything's determined. Your fate is, your life journey is your fate. You can't do anything about it. All of those things happen to you.
Yes.
And it sometimes has negative connotations.
Yes.
I hope I'm not sitting on the fence saying that I sit in the middle about this one.
Yeah.
And by that I mean that I do believe that some things are predetermined.
Yes.
Before we come to earth.
Yeah.
To have the life experience.
Yes.
And those, I call them the big rocks, but I don't mean they're particularly mammoth in terms of the enormity in your life.
Yes.
They can be small things.
Yes.
But it's how you experience them and how you learn from them or don't learn from them.
Yeah.
But they're set.
Yes.
It might be your partner.
Yes.
It might be your parent.
Yes.
Your child.
Yes.
We learn from, different people in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a person or an event or a happening, or circumstance, the family you're born into.
Yes.
The old saying used to be, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family.
Yeah.
I actually think we do choose our family.
Yeah.
Our blood family, our human family.
Yes.
Which is different from our soul family, or maybe different from our soul family.
Yeah.
So what I mean is I sit in the middle with that one. I do think I've come to believe this now over the last few years.
Yeah.
That we have big rocks that we're meant to learn from.
Yeah.
Positive and negative experiences, perhaps. But just how we come out of them the other side, and our growth, personal growth.
Yes.
And but in among that we have free will.
Yes.
And that could be to ignore those learning circumstances, or to use them.
Yeah.
So we do have smatterings, great smatterings of free will too.
Yeah.
To choose.
Yeah, I think I really do agree with you. I think that there's certain journeys or certain roadblocks that we have in our human experience that are really important and that we need to experience. And for some people, they don't actually come out the other side, do they? For some people, the death of a loved one is defining in that it completely sticks them to one place in time, doesn't it? And that they never recover from that loss, whereas other people learn and grow through having experienced that loss. And that's an important part of human experience, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Whereas from the traditional Christian standpoint, you come to earth, you live, you die, you go to heaven or hell. So this is a question I haven't. What do you think about the concept of hell?
I have come to believe there is no such place, thing happening, because I cannot reconcile that type of thinking with the
unconditional love.
Yeah, with the unconditional love of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't think that's a naive position.
No,
it's. I don't believe it's a naive position, because it's not naive in the respect that the people that I speak to and with whom I communicate in my life, they have come to that position. A lot of people that I respect greatly, whom I deem as wise people.
Yes,
and they don't get caught in the negativity of hell.
Yes,
that whole concept. I think that was used to control us.
I was just going to say, I'm just the thought immediately popped into my head that the whole concept of hell was used to control people to behave in a certain way under threat of going to hell. Mm-hmm. And I'm with you. The unconditional love that you experience would say that that's not true.
Yeah, I think that is the concept of hell is actually working with people's fear.
Yes.
Which is one of the debilitating emotions that we have on this earth.
Yes.
Like guilt. I don't mean we shouldn't experience them.
No, guilt,
fear, those things can help us pull our behaviour.
Guilt can be adaptive, so guilt may cause us to do the right thing.
Yes.
Whereas shame, and it's that whole conversation about guilt versus shame. Guilt can help you to change behaviour, whereas shame is maladaptive and linked to depression and suicide and everything bad. A deep shame about something is a very bad thing, whereas guilt about something can be helpful and help you adapt your behaviour. So I just thought it was interesting to have that discussion around heaven versus hell and the concept of hell and how easy it is to blame all evil on the devil, whereas if we have free will, then it's human choice, isn't it, Annette?
It certainly is. I mean, we can, just as we earlier on in our conversation, we looked to the the gurus of our life,
Yes.
or the people we look up to, Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi, all of those.
Yes.
And I put Jesus Christ in a different category as well.
Yes.
However, for all that, to live a life of fear,
Yes.
fear can make us pull in some behaviours that could be dangerous.
Correct.
And dangerous to ourselves or other human beings.
Yes.
So that's all right, but not in huge amounts.
No.
We don't want to make all of our decisions from a place of fear.
Correct.
And I also don't think that, I think that in the heavens, they don't work from binaries. That to understand white, you need to understand black. To understand good, you need to understand bad.
Yeah.
That's a human condition.
Yes.
And I don't believe that that in the other realms, that binary
Plays
works.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to, in order to have heaven, you've got to have hell. I do not believe that. Because I think that even though I don't fully understand how it works in the heavens, but I do believe that it's a place of infinite wisdom,
And
beauty,
joy and
love, peace.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to have an opposite to be that.
I agree.
In fact, that's why they let us bring some of those things with us when we come to Earth to help us.
Because it should be an endless and ongoing circular energy.
It's not opposites.
It's not opposites. That's wonderful, actually, to think that that's clarified it in my mind when I think about those things. And I've been having these conversations in my head for a little while now, listeners, about because I grew up with that Christian and church teaching, learning and education where there's black and white, good, evil, wrong, right. I've struggled because I've started questioning some of the basics, particularly around the Bible. So, number one, the Bible is written by men and men only. Number two, the Bible of the current day is a collection of books, and it's not a complete collection because there are missing books. So if you're looking to that book as a guidance for your life, it's not a complete guidance for your life. So I've been having some of those conversations in my head in recent years, and it's good to have a doctor of philosophy to bounce some of those ideas off and to think about some of the other cultures and how they view these things. So from an Aboriginal culture, do they believe in heaven and a hell? What's their belief structure?
I can't, I wouldn't like to speak, definitively for them, but I think it's a human condition to believe in good and bad. Yes. Right? And right and wrong. I think, as you said, I'm not sure of my position in the Bible. There are different versions of the Bible, of course, according to different religions. Yeah. I think it's a very natural and normal thing for humans to have put in, as is our ancient history, to try and write down whatever language we've got, whether that's a written mode or an oral mode, or a story mode, or a creative ways. Yeah. Those vehicles allow us to express ourselves. Yeah. So there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible, just like I don't know other holy books. Yeah. But there are many holy books, Sanskrit and so on, that different traditions and religions have used to put the wisdom down. Yeah. And there's so much good in the Bible. Yes, I agree. Particularly the New Testament. I agree. Of ways to live your life and the beautiful stories. Yes. That help the allegories that help us understand the essence of the message of Jesus. Yes. And others, but particularly the New Testament. That story of Jesus' power. Yes. And his poverty. Yes. And his human condition. Yes. Is in itself the story of humankind. Yeah. But I don't mean that's the only story. But that story of how he lived his life, short life, and 2,000 years later, people are still following his message. That life, yes. But his message get missed or
Yes.
misrepresented
Yes.
by some people who tried to paint him into a hierarchical structure.
Yes.
That is
Doesn't
not
work.
I don't believe that the Jesus that I know, that
Yes.
many people know, would have wanted to have himself, his legacy in some respects,
Yeah.
not the community level of church,
No. Yeah.
but the hierarchical level.
Yes.
That's not what he was about.
Agreed.
That was not his message. In fact, it's an anathema to his message
Yeah.
of love and egalitarianism,
Yeah.
and forgiveness and compassion,
Yes.
and all of those things.
Yeah. So those components of the Bible are still wonderful things to
Help us, guide us.
and guide us and teach us and help us to be better humans.
Yes.
And I think that anything that helps us be better humans, particularly in the age that we're living in now, is a good thing. Definitely a
I
good
agree,
thing.
Toni.
Yeah. So, what else have I got on my little list of things here? We've talked about your philosophy and your plans for the future. I'm just wondering if there's any other questions from our listeners, because I've got a couple of good news stories after we come back from the back break. So we might just pop on to a quick break, and I'll come back briefly with a good news story and tell you about next week. And over to you, Rebel. Welcome back to Radio Toni. Today we've been with the beautiful Dr. Annette Duffy talking all things In Heaven on Earth, which is her new book. I've popped her details into the chat box for those of you who are interested in getting in contact or purchasing her beautiful book. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Annette for coming live into my studio today and being here and answering all the questions that we had for her today. Next week, I'll be talking with a wonderful gentleman from the US about mental health. So I'd love you all to tune in. But before I finish for the day, I'd really like to read you a couple of good news stories. So out of the US this week, Lady Gaga has announced that she is funding dozens of classroom projects in US cities that have recently fallen victim to mass shootings. The pop star and Oscar winner actress made a Facebook post earlier this week stating that she and her Born This Way Foundation will be partnering with Donors' Choice to fund the educational needs of students in El Paso, Texas, Dayton, Ohio, and Gilroy, California. In total, Lady Gaga is funding the projects and resources for 162 classrooms in these cities. The musician also used her Facebook post as a means of encouraging the victims of the shootings and expressing her condolences to those affected. She said, "My heart goes out to those who were taken from us too soon and to their families, loved ones and communities who are left to grieve," wrote Gaga. Everyone has the right to laws that make them feel safe in their communities. In this moment, I want to channel my confusion, frustration, and fury into hope. Hope that we are there for each other and for ourselves. Surviving and recovering from these tragedies also means prioritizing your mental health and checking in on your loved ones, she continued. If you're struggling, please be brave and tell a trusted someone. Don't be scared to ask for help, I beg you. If you see a loved one struggling, please be brave and reach out. Remind them that it's okay not to be okay and to listen to them. If you'd like to join Lady Gaga and the Donors' Choice in financing the educational needs of the communities affected by these mass shootings, you can visit the non-profit's online fundraising campaign. And finally, a beautiful story out of Australia where it's not just birds of feather that flock together. Scientists in Australia have discovered that fish also sing together at dusk and dawn, just as birds do. Actually, singing might be a little push of it. They make intentional sounds by using parts of their anatomy, like using their teeth,
to make clicking sounds, while some use their swim bladder to push air out through their mouth and to create an identifiable audio pattern. The fish make these distinct patterns of communication are called soloist fish, and when these noisy specimens come together in the same location, their sounds overlap to create a chorus. So that's my good news for the week on Radio Toni. I've had a ball with you, the listeners, this week, and I'd love to hear from you. So don't forget, you can always email me with your questions, answers, suggestions, or just reach out and say hi. I very much appreciate you listening each week, and I hope that I can continue to bring you guests of interest. That's it for me this week. Lots of love. Have a great week. Talk to you next week.